Welcome back and thank you for joining us for our first segment. This morning we have with us retired General David Jones from the Referendum Unit. Morning, General.
Good morning, and good morning, Belize, and thanks for having me here this morning.
You were the General of the Army for an extended period.
I was in command of the BDF for 5 years, actually from the end of 2012, December, until the end of December 2017. So 5 years I commanded the force.
So you have quite a bit of credibility to speak about issues in relation to security.
Of course.
Between the two countries.
Yes.
To your mind, let's start out at the deep end.
Okay.
What is the nature of the relationship between the Guatemalan authorities and the Belizean authorities?
Okay.
Not in times of relaxation, but in times of conflict.
Okay. If there's going to be conflict, if there's going to be a time of conflict, the relationship between the military is not going to be cordial. They're not going to be friends anymore. Because if there is to be conflict, it's going to be a political decision for that to happen. Because soldiers don't start war. They work on orders from political leaders. But apart from that, the relationship during the time I was there has been very cordial. And getting things done on the ground, military to military, was easy. The difficulty was at the political level, where our political leaders from Belize or Guatemala couldn't come to a consensus as to how to handle things, in particular in the Sarstoon area. That's where the difficulty was. But the military, as far as I'm concerned, still get along really well up until today.
Even when there are issues of kidnapping of soldiers or kidnapping of civilians, the relationship between the military on the ground is still very healthy.
Still very healthy.
Between Belize and...
Yes, and I can speak to that in regards to when the issue started in the Sarstoon River. In 2015, it started with the issue when the Coast Guard was there on the Sarstoon Island. And then eventually, in 2016, things heightened because the young boy, Julio Rano, was fatally wounded in the Chiquibol. And the Guatemalan president had made a decree that he's going to enforce strict control of what's happening along the borders with Belize and strict control of what they believe is their complete sovereignty of the entire Sarstoon River. So their contention was that it's only the land portion of the border with Belize that they understand from the treaty that belongs to Belize, and the entire river at the south, which includes the Sarstoon Island, completely belongs to them. Now that was conflicting orders because the Guatemalan military were informed that they should enforce strict sovereignty. And that is why we were having the problems with them trying to stop the BDF, the territorial volunteers, and any civilians who go in there. So I had to be in negotiations with the Guatemalan generals at the time, and we understood each other that we were following political orders. We get along well. We tried to negotiate, and I had to get into a negotiation with the Guatemalan general at the time and having a mediator present. And this is when U.S. forces was as mediators and observers of the process between myself and the current general there at the time. It started off when the previous chief of staff at the White House was the Southern Command commander here, General Kelly. It was during General Kelly's tenure that the negotiations started between myself and the first Guatemalan general chief of staff at the time. Where we expressed that we're going to keep the peace as much as possible and ensure that there is absolutely no conflict or crossfire between the Belize Defense Force and the Guatemalan Armed Forces, because that is not going to solve the problem. He respected that we had different views. They didn't take sides. I must say the Americans did not take sides. They were a neutral broker. And their reiteration was that under no circumstance they would like to see any conflict between the two.
General, if you'd allow me, I'd like to step back just a bit because I think it's important to set the context of this conversation.
Yes.
There are many people who have had quite a bit of experience, who have been on the show, been in media, who've put forward their personal opinions and views on whether or not to go to the ICJ.
Yes.
Why have you made the decision to participate in the education campaign? Why was it important to you?
It was very important to me to be part of the campaign because when the campaign was supposed to start last year, I started hearing a lot of information coming over the media as to their interpretation of what's happening on the ground. And being that I had served the Belize Defense Force for 27 years, I am more intimately aware of what has been happening on the ground, in particular with the issue with the confidence building measures that was signed in 2005 that created the adjacency line and the adjacency zone. There has been misinterpretation of what that really meant. Some Belizeans are of the impression that when that agreement was signed, that Belize had ceded territory over to Guatemala, and that's false. Because if when you read your confidence building measures, it tells you that the border, as we know it, because in Belize we would call it a border, is the exact reference mark from Gracias a Dios in the south to Garbert Falls near the western border, and from there on a line due north until it hits the Mexican frontier. Then the adjacency zone, which is 1 kilometer to the east and the west of that particular line. And bear in mind, the reference markers are exactly in accordance with the 1859 treaty. It was respected by the Guatemalans. It is still being respected by the Guatemalans. Now, the reason that was there was because of the continuous tension between the two countries. Started from the capture of the BDF soldiers in 1999, and then the discovery of the villages that were inside Belize in 2000. There was a patrol conducted by myself that discovered the first village of Rio Blanco. When I got there, there were 25 Guatemalan families living in Belize. Subsequently, when I had walked out, I had found another village in Belize. Nueva Union was the other one. And then there were subsequent patrols who went into the jungle and located an additional 3 more villages. So that included, it's a total of 5. There's Rio Blanco, Santa Rosa, Valentin, Nueva Union, and Machakilha. That started negotiations between the two countries. The OS had to get involved. And eventually those people were repatriated back into Guatemala. So things were being put in check. Unfortunately, there were some fatalities along the border during those times because some of the Guatemalan farmers stood their ground because in their constitution, there is no border between Belize and Guatemala. And there are 2 excuses that Guatemalans use when we find them on patrol. One, they say, as far as they're concerned, there is no border between Belize and Guatemala. And 2, they don't know where the border is anyway. So, and they were told that Belize is part of Guatemala anyway. So we are on Guatemalan soil. So sometimes things get heated. They believe they're in Guatemala. We indicate to them, no, you're in Belize. We show them on the map. But as the incident occurred, there was an incident in 2001 where BDF patrol encountered a Guatemalan farmer and his 2 sons farming illegally in Belize, and they got into a heated exchange. The Guatemalan farmer told the soldier that he's in Guatemala and he has no jurisdiction over him. Because of the heated exchange, the farmer lifted his machete and charged the soldier, and the soldier had to defend himself. He cocked his weapon and shot him center mass in the chest and killed him on the spot. And one of his sons just witnessed his father being shot and killed in front of the patrol members, and he also picked up the machete and charged the soldier in defense of his father, and he too was shot and killed. Unfortunately, the other son witnessed his father and brother just being killed by these patrol members, and he too picked up his machete and charged, and he too was shot and killed. Telling you that story because these farmers strongly believe that this country belongs to them because they were taught from a young age, Belize es nuestro. And they're going to stand their ground. And until there is a definitive solution, their mentality is not going to change.
And that was back in 2001,
that incident occurred.
Now, so you decided to to come forward to clarify what you have heard as misinformation on some of the reasons behind the confidence building measures.
Yes.
But let me pose a question to you before we go any further. very early into the education process for us to prepare for the referendum,
yes.
we saw all the top of the military or the defense departments of Belize come together to unanimously support a yes vote to the ICJ. It was a highly criticized move. And I want to ask you your perspective as to whether or not you think that was the right decision to make as representatives of our military forces.
Personally, I would not have been comfortable doing that. I won't go into the reasons why they did it. They should be able to answer for themselves, but I personally would not have been comfortable doing that.
Why?
Because I would have been serving as a public servant in the country, and it has been a political decision for the government to take a stance, and I don't think it probably would have been more appropriate for me to do that. I would have preferred to be neutral, but that's my opinion. I wouldn't have been comfortable doing it. They could probably answer as to why they did it.
That's a very respectable response, which is my personal view too. I just thought
Yes.
that the person who we have to make it's a political decision, as you said.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we as public servants, I used to be a public servant once. Whatever decision the political gods make, we're the people.
Yes.
We have to carry it out.
Yes.
That's our job to execute. If the people say war, let's get up for war. If the people say let's abandon Belize, your job is to evacuate, not to necessarily in that capacity.
Yes.
But I wanted to kind of double back on something you said this morning, which I wanted to kind of clarify for me. You were telling us that you've been hearing on radio these misinformation in relation, and you started off with the issue as to where the markers are.
Yes.
And I believe you said that the markers are being respected by Guatemala. Those very same markers are being respected. But you're also saying that the Guatemalans are saying that there is no border.
Yes.
So this is a double speak or a schizophrenia by the Guatemalan people.
Yeah, because
how can those two exist at the same time? That they respect the borders that exist, but they are encroaching and saying we're going to stand our ground, and there's none.
Yeah, with the western border, which includes the area of the natural reserves like the Chiquibul, Caracol, Vaca, Bladen, and those. On the western side, the confidence building measures clearly states that whatever occurs on the eastern side of the line is under Belize's jurisdiction. Whatever occurs on the western side, which is on the Guatemalan side, is under Guatemala's jurisdiction. Now, the confidence building measures only covers the western part of the border. So from Gracias a Dios to Govert Falls and then due north up to Aguas Turbis. So that confidence building measures that was signed by them is being respected by the military. They do not come across unless we meet them at a certain point and we discuss this. Now, the civilians still come across, but the military don't. But what wasn't covered in the confidence building measures was the Sarstoon. So, and their understanding, and you brought up a map earlier that shows the mouth of the Sarstoon River, which is incredible difference of opinions, because in accordance with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, this particular map here on the screen, you look at the mouth of the Sarstoon where the international border goes south of the island. That little island, well, there's the Sarstoon Island. And in accordance with Article 6 of the treaty, it says that the main navigable channel is the boundary. And whichever island is inside that river, whosever side of the navigable channel it is, that island belongs to that country. So clearly, looking at the map there, the Sarstoon Island is north of the line because the navigable channel is to the south of the island, and that's where the BDF continues their patrols.
So the actual border is the deepest or middle channel of the river itself.
Yes, the main navigable channel.
And because there's the Sarstoon Island in the middle, it would be between the island itself, which is the last of the land mass, and Guatemalan side.
Yeah, well, it was actually run down where the line is, the deepest navigable channel.
But from a military perspective, how can that be misinterpreted?
That I won't be able to answer for why they think that way, but what they have told me is what they understand from the treaty is that it's only the land portion, this area here, that belongs to Belize.
So their claim is that the line is in the opposite end of the island.
They're claiming that the line is only at the land portion. only the land portion, and that the entire river belongs to them.
You've said multiple times before that the military have clearly stated to you, and because you've been involved directly in negotiating
Yes.
or in mediating some of these issues,
Yes.
that they say they're simply fulfilling the mandate based on top orders.
Yes, they.
But one of the questions that we continue to have as Belizeans is, if we know definitively that this is our part, this is our country, this is our
Yes.
waters, our island, why have we not exerted the very same control over the area? In other words, why do we allow the Guatemalan military to come over into our waters? Why do we not stop them? Why do we not have some sort of establishment of our presence in that area?
Well, there's a simple reason for that. It is what internationally referred to as a disputed territory. They're claiming that it belongs to them. We have a different view. We are in accordance with the 1859 treaty that there is equal access to the river. So in accordance with Article 6, they are not supposed to be stopping any Belizean going into that river. It is a point that can cause conflict and can lead to conflict. It could be a serious flashpoint, because when the BDF or even the Coast Guard are inside the river and they would witness Guatemalan military harassing our civilians, any soldier on a bad day can decide, I am tired of this, take matters into their own hand and use their weapons. And it only takes one fire of the weapon to have things change. Now, bear in mind, there had been military threats to Belize in the past to actually invade and take over this country by Guatemala in 1948, 1972, 1977, and even 2016 when the young boy Julio Rana was shot and killed. The president had deployed 3,000 soldiers along the Chiquibul. Now, if one or a group of their soldiers are shot and killed, they're not going to take that lightly. There will be consequences after that. You can control the situation there, soldier to soldier on the ground, but afterwards there's going to be political consequences. So instead of aggravating the situation, we believe it's a problem that should be solved by the politicians.
Almost a stand back approach. And I want to go back to the image of the boat with the Guatemalan military, the volunteers, if we could get it up. Because what I want to demonstrate here more so is that the organization is called the Belize Defense Force.
Yes.
Here we have Guatemalan military in Belizean territory approaching Belizeans, civilians.
Yes.
Where is the defense
Yes.
for the Belizeans? These are Belizean civilians encountering military forces.
Yeah.
And we have an establishment called the Belize Defense Force.
Of course.
Who defended these Belizeans in Belizean territory?
And that's the case because you have conflicting orders and conflicting mentalities. As far as they're concerned, they are not supposed to allow any Belizeans in that area, and that's the Guatemalan military. Now, you need to know when to pick your battles, and you need to know to try and avoid certain circumstances. Now, if you don't have the brawn to do certain things, it's best to use your brain. And instead of creating a conflict, let the politicians settle it. Two countries disputing that there's an area that both of them have control or agreed access, equal access to. One is contending that they have complete control, one is saying no. You can go to conflict over it, but I don't think that's the best way.
Can I ask you just honestly, now that you're not in the organization,
Yes.
do you think that we are being too passive in the Sarstoon?
No, I don't think so, because we could have taken a more aggressive stance, but I think that more aggressive stance would have led to gunfire in the river. And I believe it would have been best to avoid gunfire than to have that happen over something that can be solved diplomatically.
Now, I'm probably having my lawyer ears this morning. I opened the wrong side of my bed.
That's good.
But I keep on hearing you say that what they're claiming is claiming.
Yes.
And it might be a slight misspeaking because it's somebody who has no authority to say what they're claiming. Because what they are really claiming, as I understand it, for the referendum is at least half of Belize. which goes a lot further than just where the Sarstoon
is.
hits the Belize bank.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted for you to focus on, it seems that we are talking about the Sarstoon like that's the only area of difficulty. The incursions or the trespassing of the Guatemalans has gone all the way up too, because there was a gunboat, I believe, which was found, how far was it found?
It was off the coast.
Miles away from...
But it was in Belizean waters.
Far in Belizean territory.
It was in Belizean waters.
When you're negotiating with the Guatemalan military authorities, do you feel as though you've been given sufficient ammunition? And when I say ammunition, I don't mean SLR bullets, but sufficient preparation, and that the political authorities have done what the work that they should do to allow you to sit there confidently and say, we find a gunboat by Dangriga, protest note. We find this here, legal opinion here. Listen, we're not in a position where I'm negotiating from a position of weakness. But my politicians have done what they're supposed to do. We have the Americans here. And what you're doing is completely unacceptable. Were you prepared sufficiently, and you feel as though we were prepared sufficiently, the public servants were prepared sufficiently to be able to deal with the situation?
Yes, as a military officer, I was prepared, completely prepared. So there wasn't an issue. When I sat down with the military generals, and I always preferred to have a neutral party to listen, because history has shown that Guatemala has changed their position different times. Sometimes it's half of the country they're claiming, sometimes it's the entire country they're claiming. So you're not sure on what they're going to claim. So you have to be prepared for any eventuality. And so when we had discussions, I personally, when I had discussions with them, I preferred to have a neutral party to listen, because I preferred not to negotiate one-on-one on critical issues, in particular the issue with the Sarstoon. I always ensured there was a neutral body listening. So what we had agreed to was executed. And when it wasn't executed as agreed, I made the necessary phone calls to either the Guatemalan general or the neutral party, who was privy to the conversation as to what we agreed to. And that is how things were going more smooth during that time.
I want to go back to something that Marlene said, because I wanted to ask it more explicitly.
Sure.
We are only seeing Guatemalan military in our waters. It seems that the Belizeans are somewhere like far away, peeking through binoculars, looking and seeing what they will do. As I understand it, military decisions are made depending on what your enemy does. That's the Sun Tzu version of it. That's
during
civilian.
war. Yeah, that's during wartime. Yeah.
Yes, but surely the Guatemalans have been active. Belizeans, we have not been responding actively to what they've been doing, even on the ground.
No, the Belize Defense Force...
Does that agree?
During my time, patrol that river constantly. We have an outpost at Cadenas that we visit every week, during the time of every week. And that continues to happen. So despite what you see on the media, it doesn't really show the true picture that the Belize Defense Force continues to patrol the Sarstoon River. They continue to do so. And that is going to continue, because there has been instances more than once where the Guatemalan military tried to stop the Belize Defense Force from going in there. But the BDF patrol insisted, and they went through. They wouldn't stop, because there are points where you can allow them to try the bully tactics that they're doing. But when they realized that we stood our ground, they didn't interfere with us, because they know that if they try to stop the BDF, and the BDF insists that they're going through, they will have to use military weapons to enforce what they want.
What became of that incident, of those incidents?
Well, I was going to just add there have been several documented during your time where the Guatemalan military trails the Belizean military into the Sarstoon.
Yes, because they were given orders that they should follow them. They should follow them the entire river to watch what we were doing. And they follow them all the way until they reach their destination, and they follow them back until they come out of the river.
Isn't that an act of war? I mean, you invade my...
It's sort of intimidation.
But you invade my territory, you're trespassing.
But it's equal access. It's not our territory.
And it's on our side of the border that the Belize Defense Force were traveling.
No, this is a misconception. If you read Article 6,
Okay.
it doesn't says half of the river is for Guatemala. It doesn't says half is for Belize. It says there is equal access to the river. So they can patrol the river whenever they want, wherever they want on the river. That's in accordance with the treaty, from what I understand. So we can go into the river whenever we want as well, because in Article 6, it says there is equal access to both parties. So you can't say that they're on our side of the river.
Would that mean that the
When you're-
river
when you're
doesn't really
traversing
belong to
through.
anyone if you have equal access to it?
And that's in accordance with the treaty. Article 6 clearly says that there's equal access to the river. It doesn't say either party should stay on their half of the river.
If it were a landmass, you would need permission to come on that side
Across
of the border.
Yes.
And there's a
if
southern
it's clearly,
border.
If it's clearly demarked.
And there's a southern border, and that southern border is defined clearly by international law. So to come over our side, they would
Yes.
need permission. Even if they have access to it, they would need permission to enjoy that access.
Yeah. Now bear in mind.
Am I right?
This is a misconception that most Belizeans have. The Sarstoon River, there are points in it because it's the navigable channel that you should patrol. There are points in it where there's only one vessel that could be able to patrol the main navigable channel. Sometimes that main navigable channel is more on the south side of the river. And if you use the Belizean analogy, you would say, well, that is Guatemalan side. So there are times when the BDF would have to go on the south side, which is closer to the Guatemalan bank. And there are times when you'd have to go on the north side, which is closer to the Belizean river bank. So it is not strictly down the middle of the river where the navigable channel is. The river meanders, so sometimes it's on the left, sometimes it's on the right. And that is why it's practical, as in the treaty it says, equal access to both parties. Not one party should stay on their half and one party stay on another half. That would not be practical.
Given your involvement in working along or being the Belizean representative in some of these mediation and negotiations, one of the things that has been called on repeatedly is for the fulfillment of the Guatemalan promise to establish a Sarstoon protocol before this process moves any further.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It would have been good if they had agreed to it.
But they did agree, they
We
just never
tried.
fulfilled.
We tried. They haven't signed off on it. They never did. As you can recall, the foreign minister went all the way to Turkey. To Istanbul. I accompanied the foreign minister, our ambassador, and General Perez, and their counterparts went to Washington, D.C. to finally try and sign off on the protocols because we had about 14 points that we wanted agreement on. When the discussion started in Washington, both foreign ministers were the lead negotiators during that time, and they couldn't come to a consensus. And the decision was, let the generals decide. So it was myself and General Perez went into a room on our own, and we spent probably a little over half an hour on the 14 points we had, and we had agreed to the 14 points at that time. And we left the meeting comfortable that we had an agreement, but then we came back to Belize, they went back to Guatemala, and when it went to perhaps their president or Congress, and they said, we can't agree to this because as far as we're concerned, the entire river belongs to us and they're not going to change their stance. So even though
So it was dead on arrival.
You can say it that way. When we came back and it went to their authorities higher up, they decided, no, we can't sign up to that. But it would have been sensible because we wanted things to be in peace, and our portion, we wanted the Guatemalans to respect us in accordance with the treaty, because in Article 6 it says there is equal access and no one should impede the other on the river. So what they have been doing with the territorial volunteers is wrong. What they tried to do with the BDF is wrong, and what they tried to do with the Belizean civilians in the Sarstoon is wrong. But the point is that they claim that there is complete sovereignty of the river that belongs to them. Now, in accordance with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, that would be ridiculous, because if there's a river that divides both countries, the boundary would be the main navigable channel. So if they were to go to court on that matter, they would they won't get a ruling on any.
General, I was looking at the provision there,
Yeah.
and what you're saying is you're doubling down. That not only in terms of what the treaty says, the 1859 treaty,
Yeah.
says in terms of how to slice up the southern border, but also in accordance with international law.
You look at the third line there. Shall be
Absolutely.
equally free.
Equally free and
Equally
open.
free and open.
Yes. It seems to me that what the Guatemalan authorities, based on what you're telling us, that there's a misunderstanding of the validity or the effect of the 1859 treaty.
Yes.
So if that were cleared up, we'd probably have a lot less problems.
Of course.
So one of the things that people who have been saying don't necessarily have to go to court with this ICJ thing is there's another option. A political, an ambassador, previous ambassador, David Gibson said, one of the things is let's go for an advisory position. Don't you think that, based on what you've been telling me, would be extremely helpful and would bring an end to what the misconception on the ground is?
I don't agree with the advisory opinion because an advisory opinion is not binding. It doesn't hold weight. There has been advisory opinions used before by other countries. For instance, the issue with the Palestinians and Israelis, there was an advisory opinion by the ICJ for them. And instead of taking the next steps in going further, in going to the court, they invaded Israel. The other Arab countries joined together. They attacked Israel. And what happened? They were defeated by Israel. And what is happening now? Israel has started taking over most of their land.
Do you foresee that happening here? If let's map it out. We're playing chess. If Belize were to say, the political directorate was to say, listen, we're going to go the advisory opinion route. Which, can I say this?
Sure.
This is crazy to me.
Be frank.
It cannot be that we go to the same court that is supposed to give us a final decision, to give us an opinion, and somehow the opinion that we get from the court has no practical weight. It might not have the same legal weight, but no practical weight as an opinion to say, if you go to court, you'll lose.
Doesn't have that practical weight. It seems not to make sense, but the example with Israel and the Palestinians is clear.
So it's possible to go to court, get an advisory position that says you're going to win, and then go to the actual court and lose?
But
I wouldn't say that.
Well,
I would not say that. That's as possible.
With the ICJ, you would need the commitment of both countries to go back to the ICJ.
I fully understand that.
With the advisory opinion, it's not binding.
Yes.
Now, if looking at Guatemala's position, if they would get if we would get an advisory opinion, and the advisory opinion would say, okay, the border treaty that you signed is valid. We knew that before. There's a possibility they can say, okay, we're not going to the court then. We will decide to negotiate.
You've told us that this problem,
can change their mind.
I think what I'm hearing from you is that this is a political problem.
It is.
More so than a legal problem. I think that anybody who gets advice from a lawyer, international lawyers, referring to this star soon, will tell them, boss. And so the insistence has to be a political one. I'm looking at the difference between the two borders. On the western border, the strategy of the Guatemalans seemed to be, you know what? Because we've already had something in place, which legally holds us to a little buffer zone, what we'll do is that we'll cause mischief through civilians. We're going to encourage our civilians to take up occupation right along the border, and every so often we're going to encourage a couple of the farmers to go across the border and see what the Belizeans do. And on the south, what we're going to do is we're going to say, listen, we have no idea what this paper says, and we're going to actually send our military down there and annoy the hell out of these people.
And that's bullying tactics.
So I'm saying that the problem isn't a reading and interpretation of the law. The question is a political mandate to intimidate, to use it for political purposes back in Guatemala, and that has nothing to do with the strength or weakness of the Belizean case.
It has nothing to do with our strength, because if the issue is to be solved between us and the Guatemalans, it's going to be a legal matter on the basis of the 1859 treaty that was signed, ratified, and on the basis of the 1931 exchange of notes. Those are legal documents which, as in accordance with international law, with the statute of the court, Article 38 1A, it's the first thing the judges will ask to see, the conventions that have been signed between the two countries. Because if there's a border dispute and it was articulated in a treaty, that is how the judges make their decisions, based on treaties that have been signed. And if there's a border in that treaty, what precedents have shown is that once there is a border in a treaty, you maintain that border forever. It is secret. There has been no cases of the 33 cases on border disputes that have gone in front of the ICJ. None of them, borders has been changed that have been articulated in a treaty.
What we got to do though is just stick a pin right here, and we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. So stay tuned.
When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Channel 5 introduces the Daily Obituaries. The Daily Obituaries will broadcast all death and funeral announcements and memorials to honor your loved one's life and memories. The Daily Obituaries airs on Channel 5 prior to the evening newscast, with subsequent repeats at 10 p.m. and 12 noon the following day. It will also be placed online on our social media platforms, all for a standard package fee. Celebrate their lives and memories with Channel 5's Daily Obituaries. Honor in life and reverence in death.
And we're back, and we're continuing our conversation with Retired General David Jones. We are talking about security and environmental issues from a BDF perspective as we prepare to go to the referendum in less than a month, in a month's time, right?
Yes.
Almost 2 months. So, one of the questions I had for you as we were talking about the Sarstoon Protocol, I appreciate that you clearly mapped out the fact that you and your general counterpart in Guatemala put together the 14 points. It was taken back to Guatemala, never approved. One of the biggest concerns Belizeans have at this time is whether or not we can trust Guatemala to be able to uphold whatever ruling, even if it's an advisory opinion, whatever ruling will come out of the ICJ. And I'll use this example. If we shift to the western border, when the teenager was killed in the Chiquibul, and the investigation by the independent body, the OAS, confirmed that it was in fact a ranger and not a military personnel that had fired the fatal shot. Guatemala refused and still refused. My last interview with the former foreign minister on the day of the referendum in Guatemala, they were still saying it was a BDF soldier or the Belizean military that killed the teenager. How can any person trust that there will be any accordance by Guatemala with whatever ruling comes in whether it's advisory opinion, a ruling from the court, or a negotiated settlement?
Yeah, Belizeans are justifiably concerned in regards to the trust that they have with our neighbor to the west. And there are reasons for that, because in the past they have agreed on certain negotiated points, and then prior to ratifying or finally signing off to it, they changed their mind and said, no, we can't do this. And it goes back to history, because there was a point, I believe it was in the late 1800s, when they were trying to fulfill obligations in regards to Article 7 of the treaty, where the British had offered £50,000 if they had agreed to accept the £50,000 within a 6-month period. That would have ended the issue with Article 7. But the stipulation is that they were supposed to agree to that within 6 months. They didn't do it. They agreed that it would have happened. That would have ended the issue. We wouldn't have been here today discussing Article 7. And sometimes they change their position. They say, from the Siboon down to the Sarstoon belongs to them. And sometimes they say it's the entire country. You cannot trust people who are changing their positions all the time, because when you go into negotiations with them and you agree on one thing, and later you get out of the negotiating room, and a week or a month later you say, no, we can't agree to that. It's difficult. It's the same with the Ramphal-Reichler proposal. During the Ramphal-Reichler proposal in 2000, they had agreed to drop the claim on Belize's terrestrial land and agreed to what was a total of an 8-mile access, because Belize and Honduras was acceding to them 4 miles each of sea access going into the Caribbean and the Atlantic. After negotiations with the negotiators, the Guatemalans, they had agreed. But later on, they had to go perhaps to their Congress and their president.
And it was rejected.
And it was rejected.
Yeah.
So even though it was a sensible agreement, it would have ended the claim. They said they can't accept this because in their constitution, there is no border between Belize and Guatemala.
Well, see, this is exactly my point. I mean, for a Belizean,
So
it's a country that is a serial contract breaker. I mean, we can go with the proposals back to the 1800s, Sarstoon Protocol.
Yes.
But even if we go into some of the very same issues laid out in the special agreement with the changing of the dates for the referendum from being joint to the having first at a date, moving it to another date, if I, as Belizeans paying attention to this process, one of my primary questions is, how do I even trust that no matter where this process goes, that they will fulfill their obligations when they have continuously failed to do so?
Yes, and you can appreciate what the negotiators have been going through for over 50 years with them, trying to negotiate and get a solution, and they don't honor what we've been negotiating to. And that is why we believe the best thing is to get the matter in front of the ICJ.
So what will be the major difference then, if it's the ICJ saying it versus them coming to the table and agreeing previously?
Yeah, because the ICJ is the apex of international law. When they give a binding decision, it is to be respected internationally. At the moment, there isn't a binding legal decision for them to abide to, because when we got our independence in 1981, the United Nations is not authorized to outline where our borders are. The arm that is responsible to tell you where your borders are is the International Court of Justice. Now, the ICJ, when they makes a legal ruling as to where the borders are, and for instance, if we go to the ICJ and there is a ruling in Belize's favor, and the ICJ has articulated that the borders, as in accordance with the 1859 treaty, is valid, should be respected, that is when Belize will now have recourse to go to the UN Security Council for enforcement, because the UN Security Council is responsible for enforcing judgments made by the ICJ. So if we were to go to the UN Security Council now, they would inform us of the same thing. Based on Chapter 6 of the Pacific Settlement of Dispute under Article 33, it says that you should try and settle your problems you have with your border problems. If you have with them, try and settle it peacefully. There are methods you can use, and those include negotiation, conciliation, mediation, or use the Organization of American States, the regional agencies. Also a judicial settlement. Now, Belize have used all of those. They've been negotiating for years. We had mediation by the US president in the past. We're still with the Organization of American States, but we've never gone to the court. And we haven't done that with Guatemala. And in Article 36 of the UN Charter, it says, we're going to take into account all the negotiations you've done, the mediation you've done, what the OS have done, but at the end of the day, if you still cannot come up to a solution, on a general rule, we prefer you take it to the ICJ.
No.
Can I ask this? And to be fair to you, your area of expertise is not necessarily law, and
No,
surely not international law.
I'm not a lawyer.
Surely not.
Yeah.
And so when you speak on those areas, just simply repeating what has been told to you, or the plain English reading of it, and not necessarily a legal interpretation of it. Am I right?
Well, what I've read is based on legal interpretation.
Yes, but that would be outside of your pay scale in terms of...
I'm not a lawyer. I'll admit I'm not a lawyer.
So can I go back to where area of competence, because I don't want to stretch you beyond where you can credibly speak. Can you talk to us about what the military competence of the Guatemalan country is, of Guatemala is? What is the size of their army? What is their arsenal in terms of that? Because there seems to be this, and I don't want to talk about it from the fear-mongering side, that somehow if Belizeans vote no, that we will, get invaded.
I don't believe that.
But I wanted you, before I went off course with that, to simply address the issue of, talk to us about what is on the other side of the border. I don't want you to talk about what's here. We'll keep that to our heart. What's over there?
What's over there is much more than what we have. I can tell you, a trained military officer would tell you that if you're going up against an enemy force, it is fine if they outnumber you about 3 to 1, or at worst even 4 to 1. You go up against an enemy. In the case between Belize and Guatemala, that ratio is not that close. It's probably between 20 to 25 to 1 that they outnumber us.
What's the size of their force in total?
It's definitely over 22 to about 25,000, about in that range. And
that's not large. I thought it was larger than that.
It used to be much larger. They had cut down. That was the time when I was in command. I'm not aware of how much it is now, but I'm telling you about when I was there. But definitely they would have...
For the entire country's army is only 25,000?
That was when I was there. Yeah. But
and that includes all the other special forces?
Everything.
Okay.
It used to be more than that.
I've seen the U.S. send more troops to Iran.
Yeah.
That's a very small contingent.
It is.
But in comparison to Belize, you're saying it's 25 to 1?
20, up to 25.
But you concede that when we're talking about defense of the border, the Belize Defense Force is not necessarily the primary, not the primary force that you're going to rely on. You're going to rely on your assistance from your... If it were to come down to conflict.
If it will come down to conflict, we're on our own. There is no one that is going to come here and defend us. We are an independent country. We decided to be independent in 1981, so we're responsible for our own foreign affairs, our own economic affairs, and defense. So if there was to be a conflict, we are on our own.
And you believe none of our friends will help us? None?
That is not expected, unless you have a defense guarantee with any other country, and we don't. We are on our own. And which is why we've been saying that if you don't have the brawn, then use your brains. There's an opportunity to solve something peacefully. Take the opportunity, because you may not get opportunities like this again.
So there must be a reason. There must be a reason why the Guatemalans, I mean, military prudence says that they could wipe us out in a couple of hours. I believe a friend of mine told me he was in the military once, but they haven't done it. So it cannot be that what they're calculating is the strength or weakness of the BDF. That cannot be what their consideration is.
Yeah, you won't really know what their consideration is. That's going to be a
it's not
political decision. As to what they're doing. Now, whenever they move, they're quite strategic in what they do. They are calculated decisions that they make, and you need to read into what sort of strategy they're employing to try and get what they want. Now, they're much larger country than ours, military, economic. They're much larger than ours, so it's not that easy to negotiate with them one-on-one. It's better to use your international resources in terms of dealing with Guatemala.
Absolutely.
Even with their intimidation tactics, as you called it earlier, and we saw after, again, the shooting of the teenager in the Chiquibul, where there were reinforcements and caibiles sent to some of our border areas, which was very worrying for Belizeans. And one of the things I think we do have to say is that there are many people who grew up believing that there was a possible invasion. But what we've seen over the course of our independence is that has not happened. As you've said, you find it to be very unlikely. Many others have said the same. Which, for a Belizean, and we're speaking to those who are a definitive no and those who are undecided, makes them even more comfortable that perhaps we don't need to seek a solution to this issue. Because there won't be a threat of Guatemalan invasion. And right now, what we're seeing is what's happening in the Chiquibul and the Sarstoon, and perhaps we simply need to reinforce our own presence in these areas rather than taking a risk of going to court.
But not going to court means you're going to accept that you want to live with this claim forever, or perhaps for another 150 years or 50 years. Would you prefer to live with this claim, or would you prefer that one day you don't have a claim by Guatemala again, saying that this country belongs to you? And that's the options that Belize have. There are different routes you can take, but at the end of the day, the big thing is, do you want to live with a claim for the rest of your life? Or if you are presented with an opportunity to end it peacefully, won't you take that opportunity? And that's a decision that Belizeans have to take. So some people will vote no based on what their feelings are. Some people will vote less. Yes, based on what the facts are. But what we urge Belizeans to do is know what the facts are, make their own analysis, and then make their decision. It shouldn't be a partisan political issue. People should decide to vote based on what the facts are. You make your own analysis. You shouldn't be persuaded to vote because of your political affiliation. You should decide to vote based on your personal conviction of what you know the facts are, based on what your analysis is, and then make your decision. No, whatever is decided, yes or no, it is to be respected.
Do you think that perhaps the current approach by Belize in these very clear areas of conflict, Chiquibol and Sarstoon, the fact that we have not, as I said before, established our own presence. We have Rafael Manzanero who keeps on sounding the alarm, you know, from the first cattle ranch to now where they've finally made it more mainstream and having people understand the severity of these types of establishments. And we continue to see inaction from Belizeans. Do you concede that that makes it challenging for people to accept that this is the best time for us to go? In other words, we don't have our own house in order. We don't have our own borders and limits established because we have cattle ranchers on our side, because we have Guatemalan military on our side of the Sarstoon.
Even more so, it is better to make a decision and get it clarified by an international tribunal. Because if you wait, there is no guarantee that things are going to improve in our favor. The Guatemalans are still going to encroach because as they were taught from a young age that this country belongs to them. As far as they are concerned, there is no border between us. And it is best that there is a decision made to inform them that yes, there is a border. Because this is perhaps the first opportunity we've had to go to court based on legal basis. Yeah. And that's our contention, that it's best to settle it if you get the opportunity, because it's not going to change.
No.
The population in the Petén, I'm just going to say, the population in the Petén from 1964 was just over 22,000, which is our neighbor on the west. Yeah. It ballooned in 2002 to over 360,000.
By coincidence?
They're growing. And then it's probably not by coincidence. Probably not. You can argue that. But the census from last year, 2018, was over 800,000. So within 3 years, you're going to have about 1 million Guatemalans in the Petén along our border, with somewhere to sustain themselves and to live. And it has been encroaching on our environment. There's a lot of gold panning. Birds are being extracted, or animals are being killed.
But what is the worst that will happen if Belizeans vote no? If they choose not to go to the ICJ?
Well, if Belizeans choose not to go to the ICJ, it is to be respected. However, what are the consequences of that? It means that we're going to live with this claim until another generation decides, let's get rid of it. The people in Guatemala decide they want to end the claim. It's been there for many years. Guatemala has been trying to move from a state where it is not so favorable internationally and trying to project their image as a peaceful nation internationally. And one of the major steps they're taking is to try and settle this claim peacefully. And internationally, we got our independence in 1981 because of our backing from the international community. Because in 1979, the resolution was passed 139-0 that Belize should be an independent state. And in 1980, Guatemala was the lone country that opposed us going to independence. So the entire community is saying you should be independent, but Guatemala is saying no.
But I want to get the flip side of this too before we change topics, because you're saying what the risks are of voting no. Many people have come forward pushing for a yes campaign. We hear you as well. What are the cons of going to the court?
Well,
what are the risks for Belizeans?
I see minimal risks, personally. I have done...
what are those minimal risks?
The minimal risk, I would say, is that the judges would not abide by what their statute is. They would probably ignore what their statute is, because from my reading and my research, I have looked at what the statute of the court is. I have done research on the cases that they have done. So I've read some of the precedent cases that they have done. And based on the research I've done and the legal opinion, there are two legal opinions. One convened by the government of Belize and one by the Guatemalans. Now, the legal opinion from the Belize side was done by 4 international lawyers. One of those lawyers was actually a judge. Well, 2 of them were judges at the ICJ itself. One of them was actually the president at the ICJ. And based on his legal opinion, he was able to clearly articulate the positions that the Guatemalans can put forward and how he can debunk each and every one of them. And I read the legal opinion from Manley Hudson that the Guatemalans commissioned in 1950. And the results was the same, is that based on international law, if the Guatemalans go based on international law, they don't have a case. And it's based on those 2 particular documents I've read and based on the precedents of cases that the ICJ has ruled on that has convinced me that the best thing Belize can do is take the matter to the ICJ.
I wanted to ask this in terms of, and I'm always wary. It's like when I have clients who walk into my office and said, "Boss, I read the Families and Children Act, and it said that I could do this."
Yeah.
Sometimes when a layperson reads law, it is a bit different from when somebody who's a trained eye.
Of course.
It's like when we had Mr. Lindsay Belag who came in and said, "Listen, when you're talking about this treaty, if you're a surveyor, means something completely different." And Belizeans' eyes were completely open. So when we read authorities and cases, sometimes from a lay perspective, we might not be able to appreciate the nuances of it. And so we might speak authoritatively, but it might not be necessarily what each particular case is and what the quality of the presentation of the arguments are, or what the angle is. But I wanted to be very direct in this question. The issues that we're having, Guatemala seems to be a country of convenience. Whatever is most convenient to them is what they put out there. If we were to get a decision from the ICJ saying, "Listen, our borders are our borders, would you agree with me that that will not stop some of the security issues that we're having any at all? Because particularly on the western border,
Yes.
it's not military people coming across, it's hungry
Civilians. Yeah.
And they're not going to stop simply because some court that they don't even hear about said that they can't go and get the poach over here and get the gold over here. They're going to say, "Oh Lord," they're not going to have it on their wall beside the pictures of them getting married, a certificate saying you can't go across to Belize. Do you agree with that?
I think it would be disingenuous for anyone to say that a ruling from the court will completely stop it. I don't believe that, because the border is over 100 miles long, perhaps over 120 miles. But it's going to help. It's a step towards a better solution, because in accordance with the special agreement that was signed, Guatemala has said that they are going to abide by the judgment. Now, what the court has will do subsequently, as in accordance with the special agreement, is to demark the border. At the moment, it's delimited, which is different from being demarked. If it's demarked, then there's going to be a clear line as to where Belize and Guatemala is.
Wait, what's the difference between delimit and demark?
Well, the delimited means it's there drawn on the map. You can see it on the map, but if you go on the ground, you won't know where it is. Having it demarked means when you go on the ground, you're going to see where it is, because there's going to be a clearing, or there can be a fence, or whatever measures you want to separate it, a wall. There's going to be something there that is going to differentiate where the western border is between Belize and Guatemala. And in accordance with the special agreement, 3 months after the decision, commissioners from Belize and Guatemala will work together and demark the border. So there's going to be a clear line as to where Belize is, where Guatemala is. So the Guatemalans won't have that excuse anymore that they don't know where the border is. They won't have that excuse anymore that there is no border between Belize and Guatemala. And that will help, because at the moment the Guatemalans don't have that authority, and they won't use that authority to tell their people that that's a separate country, because it's not in their constitution.
But don't you think Guatemalans just to play the fool? I'm trying to be very clear, because
it's a possibility.
They just to play the fool.
It's a possibility.
And then we're playing along with, you know.
I won't say we're playing along with them.
That they don't know where the border is. You think that any? Well, I come from a village, right? And we in that village pretty sure where our village ends, and there's no line.
Yeah, but if you go on the border between Belize and Guatemala, for the most part, and as I've said, it's over 100 miles of jungle in most part of it. You can stand there in the jungle and you look left, right, forward, center, back. You won't know if you're in Belize or Guatemala, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
So you can't tell the difference if you're standing in the jungle, if you're exactly in Belize or exactly in Guatemala. So to be fair to those people, you can't tell them, yes, you know.
Even now with the deforestation, even with the images that I've seen is that there have been significant deforestation.
Yes, especially on their side. Especially on their side, it has been deforested. But there are still parts of it.
into Belize as well.
It's deforested also into Belize. So you won't be able to stand from one point of over 100 miles and say, okay, I know where I am. You'll have an idea, but you can't be sure. So unless you have a global positioning system standing on where the border is, you won't know for sure.
But is it, I mean, I think what Kevin is saying is it's not just that they don't know. And I can't say I've walked over to Santa Rosa. There really is no way of telling which grass is whose.
No.
But they don't care to know.
No, because they were taught that this country belongs to them anyway. And unless they get a binding decision, they're not going to change their mentality. Their mentality is going to be the same.
What can we do to strengthen up our security position before a decision? Because decision, before we even, let's say we decide to go to court, right? What can we do to strengthen up our position in the interim, if we were to go to court, and afterwards? And what can we do to strengthen our security position if we vote no? Could you separate those three for me?
Well, the position, I don't believe is going to change now or in the near future or probably 10 or 20 years from now, because there are certain facts that you can't change. When the ICJ will make decision, it is based on what their statute is. And one of the principal things is treaties. The 1859 treaty is not going to change.
No, I'm not talking about the strength of a legal case. I'm talking about strengthening our security.
Or security forces. If in regards to strengthening our security force, you'd need to build up the strength of the Belize Defense Force, the Coast Guard, and the police are having those people. But even that is not going to change the facts on the ground. It's not going to change their political decision that this country belongs to them. It's not going to change.
But let's forget about what they're doing. So we have one, you're suggesting that one of the things that we could do to increase national security is to bolster our security forces
and bolster their resources. Because it's over 100 miles of border that
but
you need to patrol.
But this plea has been for a very long time. The famous quote, boots on the ground in the Chiquibull.
It comes with economic ability to do that. Because even though you get the boots on the ground, if you don't have the economic ability to do it, it's difficult. So it's going to be incumbent on any government in power to try and find those resources. But even if you find those resources, without assistance from your neighboring country to try and stop it, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. So would forward operating bases help?
And they have been helping.
So more of them would be necessary.
More of them.
I'm trying to get you to enlist.
Some of them has happened because there have been more. Even after I retired, there have been 2 added. There's the Caballo and Cebada has been added, and those were strategically placed there, so that soldiers can patrol either north and south, so they can actually reach to where those outposts are, and that has helped. It is helping, but you cannot stay 24/7 covering over 100 miles on every inch.
So what else can we do to strengthen our national security position?
Well, additional support with air assets would help.
Air assets?
Air assets would help even more. And emplacement of other landing sites inside the area to address issues. But to be fair to the Belize Defense Force, things have been effectively checked. Whenever there is an encroachment and it is seen from the air, there's a patrol that goes in there and deal with it immediately. So that is happening. But you won't be able to see everything from the air, because flying in an aircraft or in a helicopter flying over certain parts of the area, you won't effectively cover 120, 100 something miles easily. Because at the canopy of the jungle, you won't be able to see what's underneath. You have to go there on the ground. And it's not every time you go there you'll find something, because there's over 100 miles to look.
Can I ask you this question in terms of something that people have been suggesting? And I want to know what your view on it is as somebody with expertise in security. What you're saying is, listen, Belizeans, part of the problem is that there's no presence there. Let's issue lots at the border, and at least we have a presence there, so that you are suing somebody to pass through with 50 illegal, log in with 100 macaw parrots. Let's put Belizeans
On the border.
on the border. What do you think of that solution?
I believe it will help.
It will help?
I believe so, because if you have actual control on the ground itself, you have that actual presence, it helps. But it's still not going to solve the issue that your neighboring country is claiming
I know.
your territory. It's not going to solve it,
All right.
but it helps.
Well, we thank you for coming in this morning, for sharing this perspective. I think given your experience, and we didn't even get into some of the historical stories that you had to
Yeah.
share with us, but we do appreciate you having this conversation with us.
Thanks very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, it's to talk about an upcoming fundraiser to help to save our manatee.